All right, today we're going to talk about stats and all things encompassing them. We're probably going to rate these as how we feel their importance to the game, our character, etc. And first of all, I would like to point out this is your worst enemy, the red dot and all that it is. It can lead you astray, and we're going to discuss today stats over the power number. So when we go into our character sheet here, we see the big old number here that is supposed to quantify the values of our statistics, and some are weighted more heavily than others. One of those, as an example, we have attack is weighted very heavily. As you can see, this breastplate here has a boatload of it, 4 stacks of it. And so my belief is that a lot of my power rating is fluffed a bit because of those 4 stacks of attack. Now, that being said, we're going to get into the stats here, and we're going to tell you why you should not fall in love with what the AI recommends as the best in terms of what you should have equipped. There are a lot of stats in this game, and they are not all created equally. So today I have with me some of my X-Force Alliance mates, and we're just going to have a conversation about which stats we think are the ones you should lean into and the ones that you should avoid. So we're going to start right from the top at attack. Cookies, Newfin, everyone else in here, attack. Obviously, I showed you my breastplate, 4 stacks of attack. We were having a discussion off air before the video started about attack. Do you think it's kind of a fluffy stat? Do you think that we should, this is a good stat to go after? Where do you rank it in the grand scheme of things?
I mean, it's definitely important, right? Because at a baseline, most things in game, for instance, when you look at your skills, right? It's written as a percentage modifier to your attack. So definitely, I would say up to this point, for most of the game, as you're leveling up, early game, mid game, the beginning of late game, as of right now, I think it is important. However, I think, at least in my opinion, at the higher levels of PvP, when there are other stats that mitigate incoming damage to a player, for example, I think attack can quickly get diminished and withered away when you get to what is currently more of the end game content right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we were discussing earlier, speaking of PvP, there are some characters that weighted heavily into the PvP damage decrease, and you're trying to overcome that. And Newfin was saying that particular people he's faced in Dimension Duel, when the attack and some of the other stats feel like there's diminishing returns on them, and that things like defense pierce are more valuable in those situations. Moving on, let's talk about defense. Defense, how valuable do you think this number is in terms of mitigating incoming damage? It's kind of like the catch-all stat, from my understanding of it. Anyone?
So if the checks work out the way that they're seeming to work out, I would say that's a stronger stat than attack. I would personally place it above attack, just because of the relationship of how much less damage you seem to be taking versus how much more damage you're doing with attack percentage. I think it's a valuable stat all the way throughout the game, whereas I think attack has more priority when you're leveling up and don't have the end game stats to work with.
Yeah, so I agree. It feels like when it jives with, let's say we're in Omega War, my defense is, I'd say, pretty high. And when it works in conjunction with PvP damage decrease, I felt unkillable at times with my newfound PvP damage decrease that I've gotten recently with one of my loadouts. There was times where everyone was gangpiling on me and trying to kill me, and just by upping my PvP damage decrease by 12%, it felt like it made a substantial difference over just the 12% number. it felt like a lot more than that. Have you guys experienced the same in your PvP builds?
I recently added another 13% to mine, and yeah, it is definitely a noticeable difference. And like I said, Tequila and a few other in-game IMs, once they finally hit that 75% cap, they are notably way more tanky than they used to be. It's pretty terrifying. But yeah, it's definitely impactful, definitely.
Okay, hit points. Pretty standard what those mean. Once that's reduced to 0, you're dead. Do you feel like this is a silly stat to chase after? I kind of do. I don't care about the stat. I've never gotten excited when I've seen something has additional hit points on it. I've just thought, man, I would really wish I had a stat that could be allocated to my loadout more than hit points, extra hit points are. Do you guys put any value in hit? Obviously, having decent hit points is still a good thing. You don't want to be, like, let's say, for instance, if I had 50k hit points, that would not be a good time. But I don't chase that. Do you guys co-sign on that?
I think the hardest part when it comes to HP and HP recovery, which would be the next item, all the value of these stats are always going to be compared relative to what you have to give up. So, for instance, we'll talk about some of these other stats lower on down the list, but HP and HP recovery, you can get that from some yellow core slots on your badges, but relative to having a red core for attack and crit rate or a green core for crit damage and defense pierce, you really would rather have red or green cores, right? If you talk about getting that kind of stuff on your boots, for example, it's competing against roles such as ult gauge recovery, cooldown reduction, or stamina recovery. Generally speaking, across the board, except for the case of Captain America, I assume, most other characters are basically going to favor all of those other alternatives over HP and HP recovery. So to an extent, you obviously need to ideally not die in one hit, and things like defense and dodge will kind of help aid you in that. But I think the issue with HP and HP recovery is just, in order to quote unquote target those stats, you would have to give up other options, which I think most people across the board would favor all those other options over HP and HP recovery.
Now, speaking of HP recovery, this is a stat I feel the majority of us feel underwhelmed with. We don't chase it. I think Vrondius pulled like a quadruple stack on a piece of gear recently, and we all made kind of a joke about it because it is a fluffy stat. I feel like the only game mode that sometimes I appreciate having a little bit of HP recovery is actually Omega War, ironically, and that is just simply because oftentimes people will steal the crystals for the points. And sometimes I'm flying around on 5% health, and when I see myself recover some hit points and go up to, from 15% up to 22, I sigh a breath of relief, thinking maybe I can last long enough to fly around and maybe scoop some crystals up later on. But other than that, I don't see the value for hit point recovery in any other game mode other than that, and that's just simply because people like to hog the crystals in Omega War. Can you guys relate to that at all? Hit point recovery, fluffy stat?
Yeah, I don't. I would rather have every other option between gears and cores than
hit
HP
point
recovery.
Right.
Right.
So
at least according to the stat sheet, it does say that it increases all healing sources, but I don't know if that's been confirmed to work like in the cheat death mechanics or something like that. But even then, it's not worth. It does. All right, there you go.
It does. Yeah, I tried it on Kingtron. It does work.
Okay.
Right, well, there you go. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's still not worth investing into.
Then we're going to move down to stamina recovery. I think this is a stat that if we were to give it a grade, would probably be an A plus. Maybe not S tier, but it's on the cusp, in my opinion. Being stam locked isn't fun. There are a lot of occasions where you have abilities up and they're grayed out, which means that you do not have the stamina to fire them off, and which can defeat having good cooldown reduction. So you kind of have this dance that you play between cooldown reduction and stamina recovery. And that being said, I weight cooldown reduction very heavily, which in turn means that I should also weight stamina recovery as well. Would you guys like to add to that? How you feel? Differing opinions welcomed?
I think you hit it head on, right? I think stamina recovery and cooldown decrease go hand in hand. 'Cause, I mean, those are just interacting with each other. If you have super long cooldowns and you don't have any cooldown decrease, then stamina recovery is not as big a priority because you have time to regenerate the stamina. But if you're stacking, cooldown decrease on your boots, for example, and if you're an Iron Man, if you're running the Jarvis skill, which is giving you additional cooldown decrease, maybe you have the Doctor Strange special card, which has the implicit cooldown decrease, it won't technically hurt you to not have stamina recovery, but you're just it kind of feels bad to see those abilities have come up, but you just don't have the stamina. You're just spamming the basic, just waiting to pop the next ability.
Now, ultimate gauge recovery, this is a nuanced stat simply because for us Ironmans, I feel like we value this less, but if you were to ask a Captain Marvel the same question, this you would probably get a much different answer. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, no, I think it's very heavily character dependent. Same thing with the relationship between cooldown reduction and energy. Like Spider-Man, for example, has very low energy cost abilities, so we benefit mostly from cooldown reduction. Don't really have to rely on energy regen. And same thing for Captain Marvel. She is pretty heavily dependent on her ult just because of the buffs that it provides and how much strength it adds to the character. So it is subjective based on the character. Like you said, Iron Man or Spider-Man can't make much use of it, but other characters, yeah, it could definitely be a
that's
yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
Or Black Widow. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Black Widow. We love this.
Oh yeah, Black Widow. You guys can like to live inside of that ultimate ability because you can do so many things about it.
So
Yeah. And
this up the hype want it.
so I would say even Captain Marvel and Black Widow very dependent on this because they will build their whole character around that stat in a lot of cases. And moving on to, okay, this one I'm excited to talk about, accuracy rate. This is turned into what a lot of people in the top of the game consider one of the best abilities for PvP. And the reason why there's a little asterisk is because of the stat underneath of it, which is dodge rate. Just like we talked about cooldown reduction and how it works in concert with stamina, so does accuracy rate as the opposing stat to dodge rate. Mostly because we do have a Spider-Man main, one of the top Spideys in the game. He will tell you accuracy rate is a lot to do with Spider-Man, why we care about it. Spider-Man, in some circumstances, can become unhittable if you ignore this stat. I don't think that we cared as much about this stat a month ago, and now this is a stat a lot of people are chasing. I know there are people in this this chat right now that are in the 45 to 50% range, which they would probably argue that with the way that their characters feel should be what you're going for. And as you see me, I'm in the 25% range right now. Not maybe where I want to be, but I do want to lean on what your experiences are for some of you that have built this stat to counteract the dodge rate. Newfin, I'm looking at you. What are your perspectives on accuracy?
It's another stat that kind of they have a relationship with damage reduction and how long you live too. When I was fighting other people and I could just use the trait of Scorpion's Pursuit that Spider-Man has to just eternally use my dodge gauge and just kill them, it didn't really make that much of a difference. But as now people are living longer and they're able to get more skills out and they can get that random chip damage in between where I don't have full uptime on that, it is severely hindering me quite a bit to the point where most of these Iron Men, all they have to do is land a few hits on me and it's done. And that accuracy that they're acquiring is definitely a good portion of the reason for that. And like I said, the damage reduction also has contributed to that. But accuracy is extremely valuable, I would say, for anybody, even if you're not going against a Spider-Man, because there are definitely plenty of people floating around with 50+% dodge.
So can we agree that every character in the game should aspire to try their best to cap out or get close to capped out dodge rate? Would you guys consider dodge rate maybe the most or one of the most OP stats in the game?
I mean, yeah, it's either you take damage or you don't.
Yeah.
You either take 0 or you take full damage. And since it can scale up to such a high level, yeah, I would say it's definitely of the top tiers of stats.
But that's it's interesting though to circle back to accuracy. Then, is there a point where there's diminishing returns where we should dial that back? Are we really chasing 75% accuracy? Is 40% good enough? I've heard varying perspectives on the stat, anywhere from 30% being the sweet spot up into where I've heard people say they've noticed a dramatic difference at 50%. Cookies and I think even had a brief conversation about this yesterday. He's leaned into accuracy and he seems to notice a big difference. Cookies, do you want to chime in? Go ahead.
Well, I just for some perspective, I'm at about 37% accuracy, and I know that I still have issues hitting Spideys that at the time had 84% dodge. So we don't know, any of the formulas here. We don't know the exact interaction. We can't say, 50% accuracy would perfectly offset 50% dodge. We can't say that. But using that singular point of reference, I would probably say that ideally, if I could get, maybe 45%-ish, obviously more would be better. But I think, again, everything is kind of a give and take, right? You can only get accuracy currently from the number 2 badge slot, because we know we have 6 different badge slots. You can get it from the number 2 badge slot, and you can get it on your chest. So, in order to increase your accuracy, you're giving up things like attack, crit rate, crit damage, things of that nature. So, again, just my one perspective, I think anecdotally, if I was maybe in the 45% range, that would be great. Especially because currently in the game, there's really no PvE content that, really values you having accuracy. You're really talking about, frankly, the higher levels of PvP, mostly against other Spider-Men, but as more of us build towards trying to cap dodge at 75%, obviously that will help in other non-Spider-Man matches as well.
Okay, and
I mean, for PvE, there is some level of accuracy that is required. I mean, it's much lower. I think it's like 10 to 15% because they do have some level of innate dodge. But
so I think we all agree it's an incredibly important stat, but maybe diminishing returns after a certain point, in that chasing 75%, which is probably at this point in the game impossible. There's just not enough places that we can get that stat in order to even get there. Do you guys even think it's what do you think capped accuracy is right now in game? Maybe 50%?
I mean, I think it is possible, probably.
Oh, you do?
If you were, but I don't think it's realistic, right? So if you had 3 or 4 accuracy rolls on your chest, and you fully nanoed that to 6 red stars.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe, well, like I said, it's one of those things where I think it is technically possible, probably. I'm kind of speaking off the cuff here, but it's not practical. I think Newfin probably has amongst the highest accuracy rate of anyone in the game, most likely. I think he was, north of 60, Newfin?
yeah, 162%.
So I
with
can
the
say
4x
I've
roll.
got about 143% accuracy on my Iron Man, and I do not have a problem hitting almost anybody.
Oh, okay. That's good to hear too, because I'm interested in kind of a like, when should I stop? Like, just like Cookie said, I do think there's diminishing returns on the stat where if it's sacrificing other places, it doesn't make sense. I think there's a sweet spot for that stat where you should probably stop. But
it almost sounds a little bit like it might be in that 40 to 45% range then. If English is 43 and he doesn't have an issue, but if I'm 37 and I still sometimes do, maybe that 40 to 45% range is, a roughly reasonable stopping place right now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel good enough about it that it's definitely not my focus of trying to get better stats. I mean, now dodge rate, I'm at 40-something%, and I definitely do want a higher dodge rate because that's something I'm lacking on.
Yeah. So dodge rate, very simple conversation here. One of the best stats in the game. Some would say the best stat in the game. Obviously, we have crit rate, crit damage, all kinds of other stats that are equally important, very important, in fact. But as a kind of a game changer, dodge rate is, I guess we would call that an S tier ability. It is very, very good for obvious reasons. It's the difference between being hit or not. And there are sometimes, like in Omega War, for instance, I see the word dodge being spammed over the top of my head, and it feels nice. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot to say there. It's a great stat, and I think across the board, all of us agree it's one of the ones that you should go after. And currently caps at 75% unless you're Spider-Man. Black Widow, does Black Widow get any adjusted dodge rate? Anyone?
No, we do not.
Okay.
Whatever she gets should be nerfed.
Okay.
Actually, our dodge is our ultimate.
Crit rate. This is another one I would like to say, for me personally, I think is one of the best stats in the game, simply because you can stay in the number below it as often as possible, which is a big deal. So if it's the difference between me hitting something for 80K and 140K, that's a big deal. And if RNG is on your side, this is where I think a lot of the one-shotting happens, is that if you're able to stay inside of your crit rate and you're critting often, that's where game modes like Omega War, where you can experience one-shotting people. And especially for some of the Black Widows that have upwards of, as you'll see, my crit damage is 181. With certain loadouts, I can get it to 200, 210. There are Black Widows that are chasing 350%, which stings when they're coming out of stealth and hitting you with some of their abilities, especially they have a lot of really hard-hitting abilities. Crit rate, how heavily do you guys rate crit rate and damage? Share your thoughts on those skills.
Very high for an Iron Man. You're not kidding about being able to one-shot people with guided missile, of course, everybody's favorite ability. That's the king in Omega War. But I can also say on the other side of it, I would say Storm probably values it quite high, because Ezekiel will one-shot me before I even have a chance to say hi.
Yeah, Ezekiel's gotten me quite a few times, and I've always wondered, how are you doing this? Ezekiel has brought, and Snap have brought some respect to me respecting Storm when she's up in the air in Omega War, where if I'm low health, or like you said too, I've been maxed health and whoa, what hit me? And, say Ezekiel, you've been killed by Ezekiel or Snap, and those two, I would love to deep dive into their builds. What about everyone else for the characters you play? Crit rate, crit damage? Would you say S tier abilities, ones that players should be chasing?
S tier.
S tier, yeah.
Yeah,
Both.
because once you come out of stealth, we could most likely one-shot everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter your PP damage or your defense, we're going to one-shot regardless.
So this is, when you hear of people in Omega War where other players are frustrated with being one-shot, this is the game mechanic that is probably responsible for that. Moving on to crit damage decrease. Oof, I'm not sure how to feel about this. I don't even know how to rate it. Intuitively, I want to give it a B. I don't devalue it. I don't think it's a bad stat, but I have never at any time in my time playing this game chased after it. It's just kind of happened organically on cards, on equipment, on badges. It's just a stat that I've acquired that I'm not sure how to quantify its value. Do you guys have a perspective on crit damage decrease? I think some people really like it.
I feel like that would be a stat to chase while you're trying to get to the top tier of players in the game, because it could prevent you from being one-shotted.
Yeah,
But once you get to the level where you are the one doing the one-shotting, there aren't that many people that can do it to you, so you probably don't care about it as much. But I figured while you're getting to that level, it could probably save your life.
Yeah,
I think it's a middling stat. Obviously, there's you don't hate having crit damage decrease, but always keep in mind what is crit damage decrease competing against. And in terms of gear, you're competing against dodge on your gloves. And as we just said, nearly everyone would always take a little extra dodge over the crit damage decrease if they had to choose one versus the other. That's essentially, in a perfect world, what we're doing here, right? It's just saying which one would you have over the other one.
That's a good point.
Yep. Moving on to defense pierce. This is one everyone's talking about it right now, just as though we did with dodge and accuracy not long ago, where we put a focus on those stats. Defense pierce, the new hotness. People are talking about it. There's been a lot of testing. Some of us in the top end of the game are doing. As you can see, mine's mediocre at best. Some people are saying this is the way of the Jedi. Go after defense pierce. It's magical. Newfin, I think, can share some perspectives with some of his testing of late. He's telling people, get defense pierce. Do it. It's the best. Newfin, share your experiences with defense pierce, if you would.
Yeah, so from personal experience, I had always, just because of random stats, had been around 50% defense pierce. And then I shifted stats from all the way down to about 22% defense pierce up to, and I brought my total damage up a lot more. And I was all of a sudden actually hitting people for significantly less damage. Okay. So it seems that as though the game's relationship in how it equates total damage output seems to be heavily reliant on defense, and then the PvP damage reduction then further spikes that to an astronomical level of damage reduction. So essentially, the other stats, like total damage and PvP damage, are valuable, but without the initial reduction of defense pierce, their overall value gets severely hindered due to whatever the math is that's working out. But it is a severely noticeable difference between hitting somebody for 20% of their health and then hitting them for 60% of their health when you bring up the defense pierce to a much higher level.
Would you, in your experience, say this is an S tier stat? One you should chase? Yes? Oh, wow. Okay. All right. I up until our conversations. You have a question? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, now it's kind of Iron Man specific, because I saw, we were chatting about the active trait that gives you the extra armor-piercing damage to targets under 50% health. Is that something that would essentially make it, though, if you are using that as Iron Man, you don't really have to put as much into defense pierce as other characters do?
I mean, so Zayas was saying that the defense pierce from that, even though the wording is different, is still defense pierce. That could be anecdotal. But when you get below the 50% mark, that 30%, theoretically, if it just directly applies to defense pierce, then yes, you would only need a 45% to effectively cap as soon as you hit that amount. I don't know what it scales up to. I don't know what his was at. It's a 10, so yeah, you would effectively only need 45%.
Okay, cool. So that's another kind of character-specific thing to focus on.
Yeah.
Okay, max damage rate. This is one, I've seen some arguments in global chat quite often about this statistic. And, okay, from my perspective, from my understanding of this stat, it is the time spent at the maximum possible damage of that particular skill. So let's say my basic does at maximum damage on average, not on average, the maximum possible damage. Let's say I hit for 140k with my basic. That is how often that number happens. Is that correct?
That is my interpretation. So the way I look at it is basically every attack is going to have a roll, like a high to low roll modifier, and the damage is going to fall somewhere in that range. So the max damage rate is sort of increasing the likelihood that when you do an attack, you're going to get the high end range of that attack roll. So if your range is 100 to 150k on a basic, if you stack max damage rate, you are more often going to get closer to that 150 than you are that 100. That's my interpretation of that.
So it's kind of like a crit inside of a regular attack, sort of. The weird... Yeah, go ahead.
At least from how I'm understanding it, it's more similar to like a MMORPG where you have like a damage range. of say like 30% of your damage or 100% of your damage, and the max damage rate essentially, when you get it up to 100%, that guarantees that you're going to hit that max cap percentage of damage each time.
Yeah, I feel it's very much a kind of a D&D rules kind of thing there.
Yeah, I think it's a dice roll essentially, and the more you're investing in that, the less of a chance you have the dice roll low.
And I think that's probably more geared towards PvE combat, because in PvP it's just straight DPS. Right. If you can kill it quick enough, who cares how, if you're hitting your max damage, you're gonna win.
Yeah, with PvP you're looking more for the spike damage than you are for the consistency, and competing with other stats that add to that spike damage when you're going for max damage, so that makes it a lot less valuable compared to the two.
Do you guys?
I think the only place you get that is what bonus rolls on Omega cards, as far as I, can think off the top of my head.
If I pull max damage on an Omega card, I'm crying inside.
Yeah, no, I believe Omega cards are the only place that you can pull that.
So this is one I want to off the hip give a grade. Intuitively, I think that I want to give it a D. I haven't invested in it. I've never felt inclined to invest in it. I almost think it's not a good stat.
I would say until we get to a point where they would conceivably have PvE content where you're hitting the same, raid boss for 10, 15, 20 minutes. If you get to that point, you can start deriving some value from max damage rate.
Mm-hmm.
But in a world where, right now we're clearing the highest end PvE content in a minute to a minute and a half, you're just not going to see a return on investing in max damage rate, right? And if you're a lower level, you're going to get better value out of literally almost any other stat, I'd say.
Yeah.
And there are circumstances where it can be used, but it's only like skills like Busy noted in our chat here with Dr. Strange getting a large max damage buff when he uses certain skills. That definitely does add some very, very nice value, but as far as prioritizing it on gear or cards or anything like that, no, definitely not.
Yeah, even for the attack to do multiple things, I think it's very overshadowed by crit. Like, for the guided missile for Iron Man, I'm taking crit rate and damage over max damage.
So the next ability is one I personally have a love affair with, and that is cooldown decrease. Everything about my build is me being able to spam my best abilities over and over again. There are times, even facing other Iron Men, where I feel like I can sometimes get guided missiles off, which for us is our bread and butter. Sometimes 2 to 1 compared to other people, just because my cooldown is through the roof. This is a cooldown spec I'm running. But at what point is cooldown too much? We've done some testing with this, and sometimes that 1 second you shave, is it worth it? I'm not sure. I've done a lot of testing with this because I'm trying to figure out whether or not there's a cutoff point to where you stop chasing this stat. However, I do enjoy the benefits to this point. And what about you guys? Cooldown decrease, how do you feel about it?
Speaking from, I think it's, again, a subjective stat based on the character. Like, from a Spider-Man's point of view, if you're playing him, I have 41% cooldown reduction, and I love it because all of our abilities pretty much are all extremely low energy cost, and we gain more dodge gauge when we use certain skills. We regen enough energy that it doesn't really affect us in any way in terms of like energy regeneration, so the more cooldown just keeps getting that cooldown closer and closer to giving us another dodge gauge when we use Spider Sense Combat or Web Swing. So I rated it an S tier stat for Spider-Man personally, just because of how incredibly effective it is at adding to our tankiness that we desperately need because of everybody else hitting extremely, extremely hard.
Yeah. Total damage. I feel like this is one that I've heard some people say could be a mediocre stat at best. It might not be. What do you guys think? Is this a good stat? Total damage? On paper, you think it would be a really great stat. This would be one of the best stats. Total damage, 46%. Oh my God, that's got to be amazing. However, maybe not.
I mean, if it's a straight buff to your damage, then yeah, that'd be fantastic. But I don't know if I've ever seen an official, hey, this is exactly what it does.
Yeah. Newfin was talking about it earlier.
It does seem to be just an additional addition to the multiplicative equation, essentially, for how your damage is calculated. But like I said, it is severely dependent, just like all the other percentage scalings, on how much armor that you're hitting through. So if you don't have the defense pin to support it, then it's a very bad stat. But if you have the correct amount of stats before it hits, then yeah, it's great. Again, we tested this with Zayas a few times in duels, where I took off my Green Goblin's Madness, which is 28.5% total damage added. And when I took it off and had the same amount of defense pierce, the damage difference was very noticeable. But when I had very low defense pierce, it just didn't seem to do much of anything.
Oh, interesting. Status of...
Sorry, I was just going to ask, are there any characters that don't have high defense pierce naturally?
That like don't gain it through something, or...
Well, like, you know, because when we were talking about the defense pierce with Iron Man earlier, it seems like he's got pretty high, but are there any characters that suffer on that?
I mean, there's plenty of characters that don't get any defense pierce through like skills or talents or anything like that. I don't think Spider-Man gains much in that way in terms of the spec tree or anything like that.
Status effect resistance. This is, in my assumption, the difference between me getting webbed up and not being webbed up. And Omega War, for instance, last night I was there were some Spider-Men that were webbing me up, but my it didn't seem to matter, simply because once they webbed me up, my PvP damage decrease is high enough to where I wasn't taking a lot of damage when I was webbed up. However, they were webbing me up at will. So I was being webbed up quite often in a lockdown, couldn't move, stuck for sometimes what felt like an eternity at a time. As you can see, my status effect resistance isn't very high, but I'm not sure that this is a stat I will ever chase. I'm willing to, I'm okay with the idea that occasionally I will get locked up. There are times Doctor Strange's have locked me up and had me stunned. And I feel like I'm still okay with the idea that I spend most of my time flying around at the top and I'm just coming in out of nowhere and hitting people. So I'm okay with not going after the stat. Have any of you guys valued this stat on any level?
Yes, I recently doubled my status effect decrease and noticed a huge difference in getting webbed and not being webbed. Especially with Iron Man flying around, because you know our guard damage gets halved when you're in the sky. So it's been a big change for me, and it works well with the PvP decrease because that was something I also increased. So even when you do get webbed, yeah, I'm getting destroyed by 500 people on the ground, but I can still get up and get away.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's something that only matters when you're effectively guard broken. So in terms of like valuing it over other stats that would go into those slots, not so much. But if you do happen upon it, it's, you know, not a terrible thing to have.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't prioritize it by any means.
Yeah, then that brings us to status effect accuracy. And likewise, I feel this is a character-dependent statistic. Obviously, if you're playing Spider-Man that we were just talking about, having a good accuracy for this, if you're playing a web build, would be important. However, Iron Man, I don't care about this. I'm just trying to hit you with damage. Would you guys agree? I don't use burn any longer. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I used to use burn. My perspective on some of this stuff was different at one time. And then through, you know, all the testing we've done, changes I've made in my loadouts, this isn't an ability that I care about. So just because I don't currently run anything that depends on it. Obviously, though, if you're running a web build Spider-Man, that's incredibly important. Like 50 Gunner was talking about one of his builds he uses against certain characters. He has leaned into webbing people up. So this would become obviously a much more important stat then. Does anybody want to...
Star-Lords,
Yep.
I assume Star-Lords probably also want that accuracy in order to get their stuff to stick.
So moving on to PvP damage and decrease, we've had a lot of conversations about this recently because there are people that we face in Dimension Duel that have spent some money lately or whatever they've done to make improvements to their characters, and you can see it now. There are people that we typically have faced in Dimension Duel that we could auto if we chose, and now there are people that we have a little bit of disdain for facing them in Dimension Duel because we've seen some people max these both of these stats. I experienced, like Newfen and I were talking, I recently increased my damage decrease to where it's at now wildly more noticeable. I was in the 30 percentile before this, almost to 50 now. Last night in Omega War, just at where I'm at now, I felt like I was nearly unkillable at one point with this statistic. But my assumption is that it's also working in concert with my defense score. Can you guys co-sign on that? Do you think it's working with that ability? Because I felt ridiculously tanky. I can't imagine what it's going to be like if I got this stat to 75%. Do you think that that's a valuable? Do you think chasing after 50 for that 75% decrease is valuable if you're someone that enjoys PvP? Do you think that there's a diminishing? Do you think there's diminishing returns?
So
I would say it's even more powerful than damage itself. Sorry.
Yep.
Well, I was going to say I haven't upped my defense recently, but I have upped my PvP decrease, and it's been a huge difference. I'm trying to get to that point where I can take on a group of 10 or whatever and get out and still have 50% health, and it's getting close.
Yeah. So it sounds like everyone's valuing decrease over damage, which was something probably when we started the game early we would not have done. We would have thought glass cannon's the way to go, weigh heavily into damage, and just because it felt like that's the way to go, like load up on offense. But the decrease is wildly effective. And
so I don't know about that because I have capped my PvP increase, and it's been capped for a while. So being able to drop them before they can drop you is obviously important. But I'm talking pretty much just from Mega War Heroes. When you do, like with Iron Man, if I use the blades on a target and I'm suddenly stuck on the ground and I've got a bunch of people all attacking me, that PvP decrease will keep me alive. Whereas if I'm just flying around with a PvP increase, I just drop everything and it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm. Guard damage and decrease. Oh, Cookies, did you want to add to that?
Oh no, I was just gonna say you can't do DPS if you're dead.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Guard damage and guard damage decrease. Okay, this is another stat that early in the game I thought was important. I don't any longer. I find that both in PvE and PvP, who cares? You're dead. I one-shotted you. This stat uncommonly comes into play. Not that it never does, but I care less about it. And I'm excited if somebody has a counterpoint or if they also agree. Either way, I think a conversation about the stat is important because I have devalued this. There was a point in time I thought guard damage was important, but there are some primes, some other that never get guard broken. They die before that happens. Likewise with players, if you're one-shotting them, who cares if they're guard broken? Guard damage decrease, though, I think I value a little bit more, but not really, just for the same reasons I don't value guard damage. Do you guys agree or disagree? I'm excited to hear your answers.
I think it's kind of specific to the player. For instance, like at the top level, when you're in Omega War, it kind of goes with what I was saying about the status decrease, not being able to get guard broken by Spider-Man or what have you, help me stay alive. But again, if you're having to worry more about getting one-shotted than staying alive, for the entire Omega War, it's going to be a very different perspective.
As a Widow, when I fight against flyers, I'm able to guard break them.
And they drop out of the air. Yep.
As I'm not spec into it, but I'm able to guard break people that are flying longer in Omega War and Dimension Duel.
Yeah. So I would say having my guard broke when I'm in the air and dropping to the ground, that's not fun. And now I'm in your world and someplace I don't want to be. So I think that's a pretty good perspective. But as far as building the stat goes, I don't care about it. Do any of you guys?
For practical purposes, once again, what is it that is competing against? So you can get guard damage on your chest, but you are not getting accuracy, attack, crit rate, or crit damage. So what would you rather have? For me, literally anything other than guard damage in that scenario, right? Guard damage decrease, that's not bad. But what is that competing against? Crit damage decrease and dodge right off the bat. So I'd probably prefer to have both of those over guard damage. So it's probably like a C level. Like it's not hurting you to have that, but it's not optimal for the vast majority of circumstances, in my opinion.
Yeah, if I rolled it on an Omega card as a bonus stat and the rest of the stats were really good, I wouldn't be overly upset about it, but I certainly wouldn't take it over dodge on gear.
Supervillain damage. This is obviously this is for PvE, and I'm unsure how to value my 46%. I will say that with some of the builds I have that are PvE centric, where I've built them specifically to kill things in raids and Dark Zone, you can quantify that I can do that super good. I'm very good at killing things in PvE. I put up some really wild, I would almost say maybe top in the game, and I don't know how heavily it weighs from that supervillain damage or not, but my stats in those regards are very good. And well, how do you guys feel about that stat? Do you care about it? Again, if you're somebody that loves PvP, this is, I think, one of the things that competes with why I'm not maxed PvP everything is because my supervillain damage is high. So
I think based on that humbling test we did on a raid with you and I, that supervillain damage certainly makes the difference, because I think you doubled my damage, and I'm usually in like the 80 percentile.
Yeah, so English Lion and I had a friendly little competition, and I'm going to tell you, I was concerned because he was so confident. Like he said, he's typically top DPS in every group he's in by a large margin. So he and I went into a raid together, and we were watching the DPS chart, and mine was still through the roof like it would be with anybody else, and he was like, holy smokes. So we did go into my stats, take a look at this, and the stat that stuck out was my supervillain damage. I think it's fair to say that's probably the hero in that regard. And so like Dark Zone, for instance, it's pretty normal for me to be up at the top. Zaius is actually pretty PvP centric, and he does well there. When he chooses to, he can be at the top as well. So that's why I'm not sure where his supervillain damage is, but mine is quite high, and I feel like that's why I think that I might be top in the game when it comes to killing things that are single target. Supervillain damage decrease, I don't care about it. I'm not worried. Again, like Cookie said in the previous conversation about guard damage and decrease, I'd rather have dodge first. I'd rather dodge the supervillain. I'd rather some of these other stats take precedent over decreasing the damage they do to me. It's not something I typically worry about being killed by them. However, I have felt a couple things that have felt like stealth nerfs to some of the raid bosses of late, where it feels like they're hitting harder than normal as well. So maybe there's something there. I'm not sure.
I did want to add something about the supervillain damage. I do feel that unless the devs make a change to where the person who does the most damage in Dark Zone gets the extra points, it's pretty much pointless, aside from if you want to continually set records for how quickly you solo a blitz or a raid or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I'd kind of say, again, when it comes to supervillain damage, increase and decrease, I'd say you're basically going to be getting that from Omega cards. So if you are, trying to level your characters through the story, maybe, like your first run through, maybe you want a little supervillain damage. But, we can talk about shaving like a second off of our world record blitz run, doing it in 40 seconds instead of 41 seconds because we have supervillain damage. But, for practical purposes, I would say if you're a person that is trying to build, like one set of Omega cards, for example, and get the best return on your investment, I would say, in my opinion, you're probably better suited either going some kind of a flat damage increase and then maybe a PvP increase or decrease.
Yeah.
Because right now in the game, if you're, in the 900,000 to 1 million power range, roughly, you don't need supervillain damage increase or decrease. You're going to get better value from other things in place of that. So, in a perfect world, we'd, have a need to, for instance, use the Savage Shadowland set and then have a different set of Omega cards specific to PvE, and then another set for PvP. But once again, this doesn't hurt you, but it's also a completely dead stat if you turn around and, for instance, use those same Omega cards in PvP, right? You're going to literally get nothing out of there.
For X-Force in the current state of the game, supervillain damage is something that if mine dropped to 0% right now and it went somewhere else, I would be fine with that. However, there is a new game mode coming soon called Invasion, where maybe being really good at killing bad guys will be weighted differently again. If that is scaling difficulty, and it gets progressively harder and harder as you go. That's what I hope for the game mode. I hope it is. I don't want to get into a conversation about Invasion, but my hopes are that supervillain damage will be important because of that game mode. So I'm kind of hanging on to it because of that, but we'll see. Scrolling down to the final stats: surface to air, air to surface, villain damage decrease. I think we can have a quick conversation about all four of these at the same time. As you can see, I don't have anything in them. Do any of you guys care about these stats? I have seen some people say that they value them, at least the surface to air and air to surface. I've seen other people scream from the mountaintops that they're garbage and that you should avoid them. What are your perspectives?
So
Just a quick one. I would say air to surface and surface to air do add to the multiplicative equation, aside from that.
I recently pulled an Omega card that the fixed stat was air to surface damage, and I've had it equipped, and I have noticed absolutely no difference in Omega War between being able to one-shot people with missiles and not, or being able to do extra damage to anybody. Yeah. It does nothing for me.
Yeah, I used to have a decent air to surface as well, and I at one point, as I made adjustments, obviously lost that stat. And I don't feel the effects.
Game Shark.
I don't feel the effects of it. Just like English Lion said, who knows? I don't know if it was important or not, but I don't feel the sting of ditching it. What about you guys? Even the Black Widows, Rob, do you feel like air to surface is important?
It doesn't change anything in my damage.
Nothing.
Nothing at all. And I have a maestro card, which is very important for me. It doesn't change nothing at all.
So I
want to say one thing. I think the only place to get the villain damage modifier, not super villain, but the villain damage modifier, is from the Iron Man special card. Maybe some low level cards. Nobody's happy to see that. When you get a special card, if your special card is Iron Man, you're probably pretty sad about that when you realize what it's giving you.
You were rubbing salt in the wound that I just.
I have an Iron Man card. I don't have a Black Widow or a Captain Marvel or a Spider-Man. I have an Iron Man card, and especially by now not being able to run alts multiple times, which is basically just a soft launch player problem. I don't think that stat has, frankly, any value.
Oof, no value at all.
I mean, it might help you incrementally kill non-named prime bosses faster, but again, that's one circumstance where you would literally get more value out of, I would say, literally any other stat in the game than villain damage.
I do say though, if invasion mode does become a horde thing, it would have value then. But
absolutely. I mean, hey, I would love it if Netmarble actually gave us a reason to value supervillain damage. And normal villain damage, but again, at the time of recording this on September 3rd, 2021, there's no hope.
Well, guys, I think there's a ton of valuable information because we are an alliance that does a lot of testing amongst ourselves, and we share that information with each other. And I think there's a lot of value here, not only for new players, but people that have maybe been playing since the beginning of soft launch as well, that will find value in this conversation, and maybe it will change their perspectives. Hearing from us who've tested a lot of these abilities in multiple different environments, from Omega War, Dimension Duel, to to Dark Zone, to Blitz, you name it. A lot of us are obsessed with where we should put our resources in terms of statistics. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today and sharing your perspectives on all of these stats. And I'm excited for us to do more testing and give more player feedback on what we find. I'm particularly interested on defense, Pierce, right now, and building that ability. So and accuracy for me. I want to see if I become Mo Betta after I stack those up a little bit more. So yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye now.